Greetings and welcome all. This is the Legacy Guard. We are here tonight to discuss why we love Star Wars, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. This is Draco Argentum. I am joined once more by Taurus Crimson and Porglord. Gentlemen,
Good evening, Draco, Porg. How is everyone doing tonight?
Doing all right, and yourself?
I am doing wonderful. I'm excited to talk about some OT.
I'm looking forward to it as well. I missed out on the last gathering, so we got a lot to catch up to. So
Indeed. So kick us off, Draco. What are we gonna talk about here?
all right, we're going to go ahead and look at Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and we're going to examine the movie based on the different plot segments. And we'll start off at the beginning of the movie. And of course, the beginning of the movie, we have the title scroll. We are now on the planet Hoth. The Death Star was destroyed. It was a setback to the Empire, and the rebellion is gaining traction, it seems. So, gentlemen, we start off on Hoth. We have Luke, Leia, Han. They're all on the ice planet. Everyone's out doing scouting runs. What is your favorite part of the beginning of Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back?
Porg?
I think it's just you get such a dramatic change in setting. You know, you were on Tatooine to start off with New Hope. It's all desert and dry, and now you're on this giant ice ball. It's just kind of a little bit jarring given what you'd seen in the last movie.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like you said, the change in format. You have a land battle now, which we really haven't seen. And of course, you introduce the AT-ATs. It's just such a dramatic shift. For me, the relationship between Han and Leia, you see, has progressed a little bit, and there's kind of that romantic tension, if you will. And it was played brilliantly, in my opinion, by the script writers as to how they played that. And of course, the famous snow speeder scene where Luke uses the tow cable to bring that thing down. That is one of the most fun things to do in a video game, whatever game it is. Taking down those AT-ATs with a snow speeder is a super fun thing to do in a video game. What about you, Draco?
Oh, I'd agree. Star Wars Rogue Squadron. I will honestly tell you, the first time I played Star Wars Rogue Squadron, I could not figure out how to get that tow cable to stay attached to the AT-AT. I kept holding the button, and really, you're supposed to hit it once and let it go, and then just fly your snowspeeder around. No, I kept holding on the button, thinking that you had to hold it, and so I spent an entire weekend in rage trying to figure this out.
Did
But
you break any controllers?
no, I've never been the sort to break controllers. Controllers are expensive. Money is expensive. So,
True.
yeah, no, I've never raged so hard that I broke a controller or a keyboard or anything. So,
Yes.
but anyhow, Empire Strikes Back. The thing that stood out for me a great deal. Now, of course, you brought up Han and Leia. Their relationship has progressed, but Han's on the verge of leaving. He's on
Yeah.
he's got the Millennium Falcon loaded up with loot. He's about to go settle some debts. So he's cutting his ties with the rebellion, or is he? Kind of on that. You get a lot of the Leia's kind of resentful because he's leaving, but he's kind of like, I got stuff I've got to take care of before I can really devote myself to this.
Right. But at the time, he kind of pressures her into saying, like, you have feelings for me, kind of a thing, when she wants him to stay. So you kind of get an inkling there of how he feels about her anyway.
Of course, he's being the proper scoundrel again. But what really got me about the change of pace, Porg mentioned that suddenly we're on a frozen planet. Well, we went from the end of A New Hope, where Han, Luke, Chewbacca, these are heroes. They're getting medals. They're being celebrated as the great new people, great new members of the rebellion. But we get to the next movie, and they're on scout duty. They're just normal people now.
Yeah, the battle continues.
Correct. I mean, sure, they were instrumental in taking out the Death Star, but there's a war going on, and you can't afford to rest on your laurels and do nothing. You've got to continuously push and continuously work. And even though these guys got a lot of kudos for their victory at the Death Star, again, they're still members of the rebellion. They still have to help out doing scout duty, risking being captured by snow monsters and nearly freezing to death.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd agree or not, but had A New Hope not done well financially and they not continued making films, I think it would have held its own as a standalone. I mean, you kind of destroy the Death Star, you destroy their big weapon, but the opportunity to make Empire was amazing, and of course led to the legacy of Star Wars. But it was so different, and the pace changed. It was a darker film, and I think it. I mean, most people's favorite film is Empire. Mine's Return of the Jedi, but I do understand why it's people's favorite. It's just so different from the first and so original.
Oh, I'd agree, definitely. So we have the rebels. They're based out of their new base on Hoth, and Darth Vader is doing his absolute best to find out where these people are. And he's resorting to the fact that he's sending out Imperial probe droids to every planet, everywhere, in order to get some kind of lead to find out where they are. Seems a little bit of an act of desperation. Do you think this is motivated more towards more because of the victory that was scored on the Death Star, or the fact that Darth Vader is now searching for his son?
I think it's more that he's trying to find the rebels with after the victory of the Death Star. I mean, they need some sort of, I guess you could say, a PR win, um, given that they have taken out the rebels have taken out the Death Star. Because I mean, at this point, I mean, I don't know if he really knows that Luke is his son.
If can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now. You were muted for a minute.
Yeah, I was muted. I couldn't tell if it was back on. If you read the EU, I think it's in the Vader comic. Boba Fett ends up discovering who Skywalker is, and somehow Vader finds out that it is his son. Isn't that right? Did you read that?
Yes.
In the EU, so I think he does know he's a son at that point. When he's chasing him down, and obviously he reveals it to him later in the film. But that battle.
Spoilers.
Sorry. What'd you say?
I said spoilers.
EU spoilers. There won't be many of them. But yeah, Borg. What else you got?
Well, I mean, even and to go back to the opening scene though too, talking about the probe droids, you get that scene too with Luke having issues with his tauntaun getting frozen and dying, and you get that you get to see Obi-Wan in his Force Ghost form, which was quite a surprise seeing the movie for the first time, because it's not quite something that you expect to see. Telling him to go to Dagobah and find Yoda.
Star Wars with ghosts.
Yeah, that was really neat. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the first time you see a force pull when Luke is trying to pull his lightsaber to him?
Yes, it's one of the first times you actually get to see a direct result or a visible action of the Force,
A physical,
outside of Vader's Force choke in New Hope.
right? Yeah, and it's interesting to me that he is now, after the Death Star is blown up, he now has faith in the Force. He knows it exists and it's worked for him once at least, and so now he's actually using the Force to get his lightsaber, and that was a really really interesting scene and had a lot of repercussions.
They should have used the Force to pick a better tauntaun, really.
Yeah, they redid the Wampa scene from what I understand. Like they reshot it, and it looks really good. That whole sequence, but Han coming after him, and really showing the heart of gold Han. He's about to bail. He's got his money, and he says, screw it, I'm going out after this kid. He finds him, and of course cuts the tauntaun open, sleeps overnight with Luke inside the dead body of this thing. I mean, not just anybody would do that.
No, no, and it of course it did settle the question once and for all what the body temperature of a tauntaun is, and that is of course lukewarm.
Lukewarm.
Wow.
Yes, yes, that's
You went
right.
there.
We went there. Yes, yes. So of course in the morning, Luke is hauled in, and of course this is right before the probe droid arrives on Hoth. Sends the image back to Darth Vader that they know that now that the rebel base is on Hoth and they are making their way in. And so the Imperial ships come out of orbit way too close to the planet, and the planet finds out, the base find out immediately that there is an Imperial invasion. And of course, this is one of the first instances we have of just abject Imperial ineptitude. Because one of the commander who had been in charge of when the fleet came out of hyperspace is immediately summoned back to Vader to answer for his misbehavior. And so the first uh, scene in which we actually witness one of Vader's underlings being immediately terminated and replaced.
Yeah, how intimidating is that for the people, the surrounding officers? I mean, if you're next in line to be promoted, do you want that job?
No.
There've got to be some really good perks for that job in order to actually try to shoot for that.
I mean, dude, I would be turn tail and running as soon as my superior got choked out. But I really liked the probe droid. It was something new, and throughout the movie, we see a lot of new ships and new creatures. They really moved the bar up as far as that went. The probe droid scene where Han's out there and they end up shooting that thing down and realizing that the Empire's found him was a pretty powerful sequence.
Is that the first time we actually see Chewie's bolt caster in action?
I believe it's the first time you get to see it shoot, yes.
Yeah, I think it is.
Because it was, if I recall, of course, I didn't read much of the EU, but I did play some of the games. Chewie's boltcaster was a rather powerful weapon.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, you get to see that again in The Force Awakens.
Rage.
Let us speak not of Disney Star Wars. Let us not dirty this conversation in that way.
You know what's really aggravating though is that talking about the OT, it's like it's so hard to not link it to the sequel trilogy and get mad about it. It's so hard. But anyway, let's talk about that battle. How powerful was that when all these AT-ATs are coming at this small station? I mean, it really seems like an overmatched battle, right?
Yeah, I mean, because you have that visual of these giant walking machines, and given what you've seen of the Empire so far and its belief of overwhelming firepower, even though it may be a flawed design, I mean, you kind of get a little bit of a feeling of trepidation when you just for the most part the rebels are just they're just guys with blasters in a trench, and you have these giant walkers heading towards them. You're like, well, this isn't going to end well.
I was always confused about the walkers because you see, they look into the distance and suddenly they see the walkers coming in through the blizzard, and sort of blizzard, light flurries, I guess you could say at that distance. But you never get to see any of the Imperial Star Destroyers dropping off any of these AT-ATs, which I thought would have been an interesting thing to see at some point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I mean, they didn't explain in the movie. Do they have ships that specifically carry HEHEs, like troop transports that drop them? These are
Well, doesn't
things.
that happen in the Solo movie at some point? Don't you see a carrier?
You do, but don't you see that in Rebels as well? They use the Gazantes to bring in and drop off walkers. Remember if they're the AT-ATs or the AT-STs? It might be both, but I mean
Yeah.
they do have a couple of, you do in the EU and in the Solo movie. I mean, you do get to see a couple of examples of them bringing them in.
Ah, I see. Well,
And
that's
I'm,
great.
and I
Go
mean,
ahead.
and as far as like dropping them off, I mean, in a respect, I mean, as far as like a military campaign, I mean, you're not necessarily going to want to get too close to that base because I mean, you have to assume that they have some sort of defense mechanism. I mean, they do have the ion cannon at the base, and I mean, if you were to ion that ship while it's entering in the atmosphere, it would be super awesome for the rebels because then you've just created this giant several ton rock.
Yeah. How iconic is that battle sequence, though? I mean, Star Wars is known for its space battles, but that is really one of the most iconic battles in the franchise.
Well, the battle on Hoth is less of a battle; it's more of a fighting retreat, because they really can't put up much of a defense. They have their laser embankments, they have their trenches dug, and really all they're able to do is try to delay the Empire before they so that everyone can escape. You again, it is both a land battle and it is a space battle because, like you said, there's the ion cannon clearing the way, uh, immobilizing and the nullifying the effect of the Imperial Star Destroyers that are being hit, so that the troop transports with their two X-wings each can escape.
Yeah, and so at this point, Luke, after the battle, is visited by Obi-Wan and is given some pretty important coordinates.
Well, that was when he was about to freeze to death of hypothermia, I thought,
Right, it was before the battle.
before the Tauntaun.
Yeah, yeah, before the battle.
Yeah.
But then after the battle, he makes the decision to carry that out. Um, how do you think like at what point does Leia realize like Luke's not coming with us here?
I would imagine that, I mean, until they meet wherever the rendezvous point is, I mean, she probably has no idea. I mean, it's such a chaotic escape from the base. I mean, you have that whole scene with, Vader and the snowtroopers invading the base, and her and Han and C-3PO making their desperate run to the Millennium Falcon to get out of the base. I mean, she probably has no idea until Luke shows up at Cloud City. I mean, because she probably has no connection really with the rebels on what's going on with the evacuation, given how chaotic it probably was.
And they were
Yeah,
planning on jumping straight to hyperspace after they got out of the battle. It's just the hyperdrive was not working, and so they were kind of stuck.
was L337 mad about something?
We're not speaking of Disney Star Wars tonight.
Ah, yes. So after that battle, you see Luke heading to Dagobah and tells R2 he wants to put it on manual for a while. So what is the exact purpose of the R2 units in an X-wing, and are they necessary to fly them,
I
or is
don't,
it?
I don't necessarily think that they're necessary to just do the general flying. I mean, they're basically just the nav computer. I mean, I'm sure once he tells him to where he's going and once he programs it, I mean, he probably, you know, doesn't really need R2. I mean, at that point, I mean, they just basically, I mean, they're an autopilot. Um, I mean, he probably senses that, R2 probably doesn't necessarily know what's going on and may assume that something that, maybe Luke's, been hit a little too hard in the head, doesn't know what's going on. And he's just concerned that R2 will make him join the fleet as opposed to going to Dagobah. Because, I mean, R2 probably has no idea that, Luke's had this vision of Obi-Wan. All he knows is they're running from Hoth, and all of a sudden, Luke's like, "Oh, let's go to Dagobah." It's like, well, wait a minute, something's not adding up here.
Something more. Generally, the X-wings are equipped with a hyperdrive, and thus Luke is able to go to Dagobah on his own without having to hitch a ride in a larger ship. But I imagine the navigation computations that are done to for that flight are carried out by the R2 unit, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, that's basically what it is you just tell them where you want to go. They're the ones computing the course and all the math that needs to be done. And then once R2's inputted that into the hyperdrive, I mean, he like I said, he doesn't really need R2 at that point.
Understood. So Luke opting to fly manual, I guess he's daredeviling it through. He's going to use the Force to plot a course.
I just always assumed that he meant he would just kind of do the general flying. I don't know if he necessarily meant the programming the hyperdrive.
Yeah, I think he just wanted to have a little pleasure cruise there for a minute. So when he lands on Dagobah, and of course R2 falls in the water, and you have this whole sequence where they're alone. They're looking for this Jedi Master. The first time you guys saw that scene, what was going through your mind?
Well, it seemed kind of hopeless because Luke had this crazy vision on the edge of death that there was this great Jedi master who'd be able to teach him, and he gets to this planet, and there's no civilization on this planet, so it's you have a very small green needle in a very large swampy haystack.
Well, and at that point too, like when I'm watching these for the first couple of times, it's just like, are there no real civilized planets in the galaxy? Because I mean, three of the planets that you've really seen, they're all like these completely different biomes that there's no population, there's no large, settlements of people or other alien species. It's just this kind of like wasteland in a way, because you've had the desert planet, and we started out with an ice planet, and now we're on a jungle planet.
Well, I do believe that they had an original plan that in every movie, and I think they've stuck with it. Every movie has introduced 3 new planets. So the first movie introduced Tatooine. I think they quantified the Death Star as a planet. And then of course you had the
Yavin Moon Base.
Yavin Moon Base. And Yavin Moon Base had at least at one point been civilized because there were ruins that the base was based out of.
Right, which is something that you learn later on in the EU.
Oh, I always just assumed that because it were ruins that someone had to have built them. They weren't just there from the beginning of ever. So, um, so again, as you mentioned in the second movie, we have Hoth, we have the Dagobah, and eventually we make it to the what is it? The gas the city in the clouds, Cloud City,
Bespin.
Bespin.
Yeah, the Bespin scene. Well, do they go straight to Bespin? No.
No, you have the run through the asteroid field.
Asteroid piece, which is pretty awesome, where they get inside of the asteroid worm, and the Minox get on the ship. That was a pretty intense sequence.
Giant killer space slug with teeth.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. Not.
I always loved in the space worm. Like I can understand, like, okay, this giant worm lives in this asteroid or whatever, but it always had me scratch my head though that apparently there is an atmosphere inside this worm that, I mean, they go outside of it to shoot the Minox, and granted they're wearing, respirators or whatever, so it may not be oxygen, but they don't put on like spacesuits or anything. So apparently it's not the cold, hard space of vacuum inside this worm, which I never quite understood.
Well, there's the moon does have our moon has a light atmosphere. But of course, that's due to its light gravity. It's
Right,
by no means enough to sustain a human life or anything.
right. But that's what I'm talking about. Like, if you go to the moon, you're not just going to step outside of the spaceship with a mask to help you breathe. I mean, you have to have, a spacesuit so your body doesn't decompress.
True. I guess the science and science fiction here would be that if this tunnel runs all the way to the center of this asteroid, then all the gas can collect in one area at the center of its gravity.
Mm.
Well,
Can we all agree though that the Minoc is way underrated?
How so?
Nobody's ever talking about the Minocs. I mean, I don't see Minoc tattoos. I don't see Minoc merchandise. I just feel like they didn't get enough love.
Well, they're basically just a giant flying space rat. So, I mean, I don't see too many people getting, rat tattoos necessarily.
I don't know. They chew and feed off of the power core cables, so they're a parasite. They're an interstellar parasite. Are you looking forward to going and getting a tapeworm tattoo?
I already have one.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You haven't seen his ankle tattoo?
I have not seen his ankle tapeworm tattoo.
Yeah, they're
No.
matching on both ankles. It's most impressive. All right, so Minoc versus Angry Porg. Who wins? A mother Porg whose baby Porgs are in danger.
Well, I mean, the mother's always going to win regardless of the species if her young's in danger.
But a Minoc actually has the power of flight.
Yeah, I mean
The
that's
porgs can fly too. You see them flying around.
I don't know. I think I have seen porgs fly the equivalent as I have seen chickens fly.
It's still flight.
yeah. I think if a mother really wanted to protect her young, she could. And who knows? In this new oh no Disney Star Wars, but they, they probably have the power of they probably force sensitive, so they could probably attack a Minoc with the force. But
And when
they,
they are truly threatened, they probably actually breathe fire.
most likely. We also so moving on, we see a host of bounty hunters on what that's Vader's ship, right?
I believe it's the executor. Yes, or
Yeah, is it? Yeah, the
no,
executor. Um, so who all do we see there? We see Bosk. We see obviously Boba Fett, IG-88, and Dengar. Am I missing anyone?
I don't think so. Not that I can recall.
Just the four of them? I was thinking there was another one. But he obviously wants this ship. Um, Han hides glides away with the trash, and Boba is waiting for him. So what does that say about Boba Fett? Like had he foreseen this tactic? Had he seen it before being a bounty hunter? What do you guys think about that?
I would estimate that Boba Fett probably thought it was a possibility, and so he was just hedging his bets. Why not stick around just a little while? If they are deeper within the asteroid field, let someone else burn all their fuel and all their effort, and if it doesn't make any if Boba Fett is as awesome as he is talked up to be by some individuals, then he's probably got tracking units stashed on everyone else's ship, and he's monitoring where they've looked and where they haven't.
Yeah, I mean, there is a huge group of fanboys like Porglord who just think Boba Fett is the greatest thing of all time. I just don't get it personally.
That's because you're so in love with C-3PO. Well, there are references though that that Boba Fett had learned that move from Obi-Wan because he kind of pulls something similar to that in the prequels. So it's something that he has seen done before.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Made that.
Granted, again, it's one of those things. We're kind of you're going back and retconning stuff as the movies happen, but
True.
Um, so whether or not he would recall something like that, I mean, it's been what 20 something years at this point. I mean, I don't know how many times he's used it on, tracking other bounties, but I mean, it is something that he has seen before.
So Han says, "Let's go to Cloud City. Let's go find Lando." And she says, "Is that a?" He says, "No, it's a person." He'd obviously worked with Lando before. I haven't seen Solo yet. Porg, is that movie the first time they meet each other?
Yes, it does show
Mm,
the first time they meet. Yep.
okay, and so do we think that's the only time they've met? I guess we don't have any idea.
I don't think that it is. And then, I mean, getting ahead of ourselves again, though, too. I I think they've had some run-ins. I think they've had a few run-ins prior to this. I mean, I don't necessarily think that they were. Obviously they're not best friends. I mean, they may have run a few to several jobs together, but I don't think they were necessarily in constant contact or.
Yeah, what was their relationship like in the shoot. Sorry about that. What was their relationship like? Was it like kind of rivals, or were they buddies in the Solo film?
I don't necessarily would say that they're rivals, but I mean there is tension there. I mean they're not friends. I mean they're both looking out for their own interests
Sure,
um, throughout the whole thing. And I mean in a way, I mean the tension's built by the fact that you have the Millennium Falcon there.
sure.
That it was Lando's ship to begin with, or at least when their histories um, come together, it's Lando's ship, and then it switches over to Han. So I mean, I think you have some anger there.
Um, we see Lando in Rebels at one point. He comes up against the Ghost crew, and that's obviously after he's lost the Falcon, and he's still kind of scheming around. So that I really enjoyed seeing that, and of course the lore and um, the whole canon really ties together. And I thought that was neat that they brought Billy D. Williams back to voice Lando in that episode of Rebels. So that was really cool. But you get to Bespin, and what did you guys think of Lando when you first saw him the first time?
Well, it was clear from the perspective of, say, Princess Leia, that she really didn't trust a acquaintance of Han Solo's that much. She barely trusts Han Solo at this point.
Right.
Porg?
What did you think about him though when you first see him?
Well, he seems to be capable. He's in charge, certainly. And he seems to be well liked and respected. Based on this, I have to assume he's very good at what he does.
Porg.
I I think just like the first couple times, I see the movie, you kind of question him, and you're just kind of is this guy for real? What's he got going on? Because I mean, Han does know him, but it's not like, oh, yay, we get to go see Lando. It's like, oh, well, that's kind of our only option. So, um,
Right.
let's go see him. And I mean, like, and like Draco said, I mean, even with Leia being a little hesitant of him, I mean, that's just kind of, I think that's kind of a reflection of, for the most part, what the audience feels as well, because you don't know him, and I mean, you get that first interaction between him and Han is for him to punch or slap to Han, so it's like, well, this is going great.
Yeah. Yeah. I uh, I loved him as soon as I saw him. I don't know how old I was when I first saw that, but he comes on and he has just such a charisma. He could have charmed my pants off. I'll put it that way.
Well, Chewbacca doesn't immediately tear his arm off, so he can't be that bad.
True. And honestly, I mean, once you see the character arc, yes, he betrays them, but what option did he have? I mean, friend or no friend, what I mean, Vader gave him no choice. I mean, what was it really a bad decision that he made?
No, I mean, given like you said, he's probably trying to weigh, he's trying to weigh his options. I'm invested in this city. Odds are, I mean, he's probably a little more acquainted with some of the personnel that he's working with there, as opposed to Han, because you don't really know how long it's necessarily been since those two have seen each other. Um, Plus, I mean, granted what you've seen of, what Han and that smuggler kind of, lifestyle. I mean, you're always going to look out for yourself first before anybody else. So, I mean, it's not really surprising, at least in my opinion, that he did what he did.
Well, before Vader altered the deal further, I mean, it was basically you give up Han, and he gets to keep the princess and everyone else. I mean, really, it was basically giving up one guy for his whole business, or the Empire takes control of the mining operation, right?
Correct. Well, and then Vader also gets to take Luke, which at this point Lando has no idea who.
Right. Yeah, Lando has no investment in Luke at this point. Draco, what do you think? Did Lando have any other options there?
I really don't think he did because in speaking with Han, and at the very beginning, Han and Leia are asking about the Imperials, and Lando's proud to be able to say that they are an independent operation. They are able to keep the
Absolutely.
Imperials at bay. They've made deals to keep themselves free of Imperial involvement.
Yeah.
Of course, that foreshadows the true nature of the quote unquote deal that was made.
Right.
But Lando seems to be very proud of the fact that he has gone legit. He is no longer a smuggler. He is leading an organization of individuals who are creating who are harvesting this gas and selling this gas and making money and doing well at it. It's a point of pride for him.
Yeah, and even as soon as you find out that he betrays them, I mean, he immediately uh, tries to help, Leia and her crew. So I never
Well,
really saw him as a villain.
yeah, I mean, he doesn't necessarily have a change of heart until he realizes that Vader changes the deal and it's gone sideways on him. So at
Right.
that point, he's like, well, I'm not going to get what I thought of out of this. So, he's just trying to salvage what he can out of the situation.
Plus, the Empire, in the form of Vader, they've demonstrated that they are not willing to act in good faith, and so he has no reason to believe that they will continue to act in good faith at that point.
Just real quick, has anybody seen the GIF of Vader sitting at the head of the table and Han walks in, and Han pulls his blaster out and Vader force grabs it? Have you seen the GIF where it's a piece of pizza?
I have not.
All right, sorry, totally random remark, but that's hilarious. And every time I see that scene, I think of that. And I had pizza today too, by the way, just as a side note.
Congratulations, or condolences, based on how it agrees with you.
Yeah, that made me think about pizza. Now I want some more. But so
So
so a lot of things happen at that point. Luke shows up, and we have his first confrontation, actual face-to-face confrontation with Vader. So we're getting narrowing in on one of the most uh, epic scenes in cinematic history.
but we're
We're
skipping ahead as well because while all these things have been happening, Luke has been on Dagobah and he's met tiny green Yoda, the annoying Yoda
Yeah.
that has been so far removed from civilization for 30 years that he's gone a little crazy.
So when you guys first saw Yoda, when you were young, did you have any inkling that this was the Jedi Master?
First time I saw, I wanted the little green guy to shut up and go away because I want to get to this Jedi guy. I want to see this Jedi guy. I
Yeah,
was, I was definitely of the Luke perspective the first time I saw it.
my expectations were totally subverted in a good way.
Porg.
Just need to like have a visual where my head shakes every time he says that. Um, no, I didn't necessarily. Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of interesting because you're like you said before. You're on this giant jungle planet. It doesn't look like there's any real civilization or anything going on there. And then yeah, you run across this kind of crazy creature that's uh, doesn't make any sense. He's not talking properly like everybody else does. He's a little hard to follow in that regards, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting because I mean he obviously knows what's going on, what Luke kind of has, because he just starts you know rummaging through all of his stuff. So he's just kind of like this crazy old hobo, or I want to. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of like an old timey prospector in like a western, that you come across, and he immediately just starts going through what you have. It's like, well, what do you have of value for me? What could I, make use of out here? Um, and it's just kind of interesting that while he's doing this, Luke just kind of stands there and is like, Don't do that. What are you doing? I'm trying to find this powerful Jedi master." Um,
Yeah,
and
and Yoda's fooling with him, if you will. But just a continuity piece. R2 would have known who Yoda was. His mind hasn't been wiped at this point. And doesn't Luke understand R2? Like, how does that actually work with people understanding the droids? Like, can they actually understand them, or are they just inferring things based on context?
I think some of it is just inferring what they base on context, but this would be a prime example where you have that problem where this is the second movie that's been released, and then after the fact you kind of have this continuity error where the prequels come along later, and yes, obviously R2 should know who Yoda is, but when they're filming that movie at that time, he doesn't, because I mean the prequels are still just kind of a daydream for Lucas.
Well, there's another thing as well. Um, Yoda is one of a race of people. This is not really acting like Jedi Master Yoda. This is crazy hillbilly Yoda. This is I drank the fermented, swamp cow milk Yoda. So uh, I don't know. This goes into how well can droids differentiate people of different races. Do all tiny green people look alike
Hold on,
to
is
R2?
swamp cow milk green?
It's any color we want it to be at this point.
Okay, it's not green.
Okay, it's not green then. It's white milk. If that makes you
Okay,
feel better.
yeah, it does.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you and to go back to Taurus's point, though, I mean, as soon as Luke says the name Yoda, I mean, R2 should have known, at least know that name. It would be something that he would. I mean, it would be a name that he would know. So if Luke says, "Oh, we're going to see Yoda," why is R2 not like, "Oh, we're going to go see the great Jedi Master Yoda," or is it some other guy named Yoda?
Did
Yeah,
he
and
ever
it's just
say that we're gonna go see Yoda? I think it was we're going to a planet called Dagobah.
yeah. I don't know that he mentions him by name to R2, but it's just one of those little things that your brain just kind of goes, like when Obi-Wan sees R2 and says, I don't recall owning any droids. I mean, he
I don't
obviously.
know. But I mean, that's hindsight. I mean, that's coming back at like I said, and watching a movie. I mean, there's probably several movie franchises that you could point out some kind of continuity error issue like that.
Oh,
Or
I agree. I mean, I'm nitpicking. It's just one of those things where I feel like when you go back and do the do the prequels, they could have tied that a little bit tighter. But that's a nitpick. We can get on from that. So um, from that point on, you get finally Yoda reveals himself to Luke, and Luke is obviously um, shocked. to find that. And Yoda says he's too old to train. And this is the same thing he said about Anakin. And Anakin was how old? 10?
Mm-hmm.
Luke's 19. So Yoda talks to Ezra at some point. What your favorite scene of the Rebels series, Porg, when he waves to Ahsoka there. But he knows who Luke is, and he knows of the prophecy. So why would he initially say, and of course, again, a lot of this is retcon stuff, but even within the OT, he does know who Luke is. What are his reservations? I mean, he doesn't want him to become his father and go to the dark side, right? Is that basically it?
I think that's his big concern. Is I think he sees Luke as being too rash, and I think that it's something that he thinks is indicative of what happened to Anakin. They're always getting on to Anakin in the prequels about rushing off and not thinking ahead. And I mean, and obviously, Luke's demonstrated that same trait in himself, by crashing his X-wing into the planet and having it sink on him. I mean, obviously, you would think, well, let me see if I can find a little bit more stable ground to land on. Because the other thing too is like, how does Luke even know where to land? It's not like, he can pull up Google Maps and be like, oh, well, there's Yoda's house. Let me go land over there.
That's true. That's
I'd
true.
like Google Maps reference.
So, I mean, so I think that is, and I mean, it's, and maybe in some ways too, it could be Yoda kind of testing Luke, and in a way Luke kind of fails it because he says he's too old and he can't train him. And, Luke, just starts kind of railing on him like, well, what do you mean? It's not fair. So there's a lot of similarities there, between him and Anakin.
The biggest difference, I think, though, when Yoda was first interviewing Anakin and they were testing his abilities, Yoda sensed that Anakin was filled with fear. Fear for his mother, fear for himself, fear for the Jedi, fear for Padme. Whereas Luke doesn't have any of those things. Luke was never consumed with fear. He was consumed with sadness because his parents had been killed.
Yeah, the whole fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering thing. But it's an interesting, it's the hero journey. We've talked about that, and in a way, it was wonderfully done because Luke is a superstar, and if you read the EU, the new EU, he's a celebrity basically amongst the rebellion, and here in this movie, he basically he's a completely different character. He goes from rescuing this princess with relative ease, and then blowing up the Death Star. And here he is, basically getting told by this Jedi Master, "You're too old. You can't do this." And he really struggles with the training, and then he abandons the training, and then he gets thrust up against the Dark Lord of the Sith, and has some real trials. I mean, it was a really well done hero's journey in this sequence.
Right, and I mean, and you get some great lines from the training too. When he's trying to raise the X-wing out of the swamp, and he's like, I can't do it, and you get probably a line that anybody, regardless of whether or not they've actually seen the movies, knows what that line is from. Do or do not, there is no try.
Yeah, absolutely.
Iconic, and it's one that stuck with everyone from the youngest of ages all the way up.
Go ahead, Pork.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, and as watching it as a kid too, I mean, it was kind of cool because Yoda is this tiny little green thing, and you get to sit there and watch him, and you see these bigger kind of in a way, you almost kind of relate. I mean, granted, he's 800 years old, but you kind of relate to him a little bit more as a kid because of his size, and you have all these, taller people or adults per se that are like, oh, this can't be done. This can't be done, and then he's like, oh yeah, here, watch me. So size matters not. So it's kind of great for a kid because it's like, well, if he can do this stuff that what you would perceive as an adult can't do, then maybe I can go out and do all these great things too.
That's a really good perspective. I like that, and I agree. I think that was very relatable.
It was inspiring, but also it taught individuals to don't assume you can't do anything until you actually put your effort to it and put all of your effort to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we want to talk about the dark side cave?
Well, I would assume you kind of have to. I mean, it's it's kind of a pivotal moment in Luke's training with Yoda. I mean, he goes into the cave and
Wanders
you know,
into the shady part of town.
right, and he kind of doesn't want to listen to Yoda because when he gets ready to go in there, he grabs his lightsaber, his holster, and Yoda's like, "Oh, you don't need that in there," and he just kind of looks at Yoda and straps it on and heads down there anyway. Um, and he gets to run across that, and it's a visualization, I guess you could say, to show what is going to happen to Luke if he continues to do the things that he does. He's going to run into the same problems that Anakin did. You need to slow down. You need to not be so rash. Not let your emotions control you, which is part of the whole Jedi thing. And he obviously, he hasn't listened to that, and he still doesn't quite learn his lesson there anyway because he confronts Vader, and when the helmet slides up and face mask slides up and it's him, it's kind of a startling moment, and you kind of realize that there's a chance that our hero could fall.
Yeah. Um, I want to talk for a second, Porg. You are the Legends EU expert. Wasn't there something that had happened on Dagobah to create that force cave? Didn't a Sith die there?
That was the speculation, in a couple of the books that they make mentions of that. They ask why Yoda had run off and chose Dagobah as his place of hiding, and the characters in the books kind of kick around a couple of theories, and one of them is that a life teeming or planet teeming with life, it would be the perfect spot for him to hide, and then also that there was speculation that because a couple of other kind of force users had gone by the cave and sensed a coldness there, so there was a speculation that a Sith Lord had died there, and someone had supposedly found like a rumor that during or before the Old Republic era, a Sith had been hunted down on the planet and killed there. So you had kind of this, um, dark power kind of lingering there. So with Yoda being close by, it kind of the light and the dark kind of canceling each other out, or
Which
you know
would hide him from Sidious, essentially.
right, yeah. So you get kind of a way to baffle the radar. And they do have several other examples in the Legends EU of that instance, on the Yavin Moon base. Exar Kun's um, tomb is there, and his spirit still haunts the temple. The rebels weren't there long enough to really have any effect on it or be affected by it. And in the comics, and I think it's actually even in the new EU, um, Leia's on Naboo at some point, and she kind of goes across the spot where Darth Maul is supposedly killed, and she senses a kind of a coldness. Um,
Yeah, and I was actually just thinking about that a second ago, and that bothers me because he didn't die. And I've read that comic as well. And she senses that coldness there. How do you explain that? Where because like you said, there's supposedly a coldness where a Sith master dies. Why does Leia sense that?
Well, I mean, she would sense it because, I mean, she obviously has force abilities too. I don't know how well she's necessarily been trained at that point.
Yeah, we know she has force abilities. She can fly through space, but I'm just saying Darth Maul didn't die.
Well, I mean, that would be a question of when did that comic come out versus when, he's, shown to be alive again in Clone Wars.
Well, that's new EU, isn't it?
That I thought it was, but I'm not sure exactly though when it came out. I mean, if it is brand new EU, I mean, I'm not quite up to speed on the comics. I didn't quite read a lot of those until here recently. I'm reading some of the newer EU stuff.
I'm almost positive that is new EU, which would have made it come out way after he was reintroduced with Rebels. So it's just one of those things where you kind of scratch your head, and it's like, well, if he was still alive, why would she have sensed it? But we can move on.
There's something else I'd like to bring up though before we move on from that topic altogether. Regarding fan theories and this cold spot. Of course, Darth Maul had been thought to have died there at that location, but we do know of one individual for certain who did die at that location, and that was Qui-Gon Jinn. And there is a fan theory that Qui-Gon Jinn was actually a renegade Jedi, and that he was actually being the student of um, Darth Tyrannus, whom we
Count
know
Dooku, yeah.
better as Count Dooku, that he had actually been subverted by Count Dooku and was actually looking for prodigal Jedi who could be swayed over to the dark side. It could be that Obi-Wan was meant to eventually fall to the dark side, just as Anakin eventually did.
There's also a crazy theory about Rose Tico being a spy.
Yes, well, that's because Rose Tico is a spy. But that's Disney Star Wars, and we're not speaking of that tonight.
I know.
I would question the theory about. I mean, Qui-Gon definitely was rogue in his ways. I don't necessarily know how much I would put stock in him being subverted over to the dark side. That makes me a little leery, but I mean, we've seen crazier things happen.
We certainly have. But again, we're not talking about Disney Star Wars.
Oh, not even in Disney Star Wars and other Star Wars stuff. But I mean, again, in the Legends EU, I mean, we've run across the coldness. There's an instance where I believe it's Leia goes to the Forest Moon of Endor, and they're orbiting there, and she apparently is able to somehow in their orbit go across the spot where Sidious dies, and she senses that coldness as well. Pretty sure it was Leia, it might have been Mara Jade, but so I mean, there like I said, there are several instances in the Legends EU that you to give stock to that theory at least. Of the dark side cave or whatever they want to call it on Dagobah.
Well, can I just point out for a second? I think it's canon that Sith cannot appear as Force ghosts. Am I correct?
Not that we've seen so far. Well, I mean, I think there's a few instances, but I don't know how much of that's more, just maybe the imagination of the Jedi. Because I mean, you have that when Yoda goes on his journey in the Clone Wars, basically to learn how to become a Force ghost. He goes to Korriban and runs across Darth
Bane.
Yeah, sorry. So I mean, he sees Darth Bane there. So it's like, is that just an apparition of Yoda's kind of imagination, or is it an apparition of the force, the will of the force, or is it a force ghost of Darth Bane?
Yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily clear. I kind of got the sense that Bane was trapped there.
Mm-hmm.
Even if he was able to communicate with his spirit, Bane could not leave Korriban, whereas a Force Ghost can essentially appear anywhere. But what my initial point was going to be is, it doesn't Qui-Gon Jinn appear as a Force Ghost in Clone Wars to Ahsoka
Yes.
and Obi-Wan?
I don't know if he appears to them. I know he appears to Anakin
To
when
Anakin.
they're on. Yeah, when they're on the
That's the
with the father and the son and the daughter.
yeah.
Force overlords.
Yeah. There's a name. There's a name for that trilogy of episodes. It's called the. Oh
Mortis.
man.
Yeah,
Mortis
they're,
arc.
they're
Yeah. The
Mortis.
Mortis arc.
Yeah,
But
and they
but
brought Liam Neeson back to voice him too, which again was
yeah,
cool.
yeah. And that was an actual appearance of a Force Ghost, right? That wasn't a Force Vision.
No, it's my understanding that he was a Force ghost.
Okay. Yeah. Which would indicate that he was in fact a light side user. Um, but we've spent a lot of time on this topic. So, what do you guys think it means when Vader's mask comes off and Luke sees himself in there? Is that a an indication that Luke is related to Vader, or is that your path can lead you to the dark side and you could become what you hate the most?
I think it's a multi-tiered way of interpreting it. Either A, you could easily become that which you hate. B, you are currently your greatest enemy. You are the one that's holding you back from achieving greatness. Or C, your over eagerness to move forward could lead to your undoing. Porg?
No, I like that. I definitely think that that is the case. I don't necessarily know. I mean, I guess granted, what you learn afterwards. I mean, it could be a way to foreshadow, Luke and Vader's relationship, but at that point, I think it is. It's just like this is an outcome if you continue down the path that you're on. I don't necessarily think that they're trying to foreshadow. That would just, I think, be a little too brilliant for Lucas if that is the case.
Well, I mean, it is in the same film that we realize that. So I agree with Draco. I think it is a multi-tiered, and I do think it is a brilliant moment on Lucas's part, because I do think it indicates multiple things. This is what you can become. I think it indicates that you could possibly be related to Vader. I think it says a lot of things in it, and at the same time, it's intentionally vague, which Force visions and prophecies tend to be.
So
Draco.
I know for a fact that during the filming of the Empire Strikes Back, they've had videos, documentaries on it. They were so concerned with leaks getting out that when it came to the actual scene where Luke and Vader are in Cloud City, they've had their lightsaber battle. When they were filming the scene, the actual line that was spoken by the actor who played Darth Vader was not "I am your father." It's that Obi-Wan killed your father, and they knew it was going to get out. That was in all the newspapers. Everyone heard these rumors that Obi-Wan really killed Luke's father. What's going on? The only people who knew the actual line was of course George Lucas, the other directors on set, and Mark Hamill. The only other person who knew the answer outside of the production studio was James Earl Jones, who did the voiceover.
Right. I've
So,
heard that as well, which is interesting.
so for them to put that so early in the movie as a form of foreshadowing, I think I don't think it's so much a foreshadowing of this guy's your dad. I think it's more of a this could be you.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it both ways. I mean, regardless of how they tried to hide that, I mean, I think you can interpret it multiple ways. I mean, that's what prophecies and force visions are. Like I said earlier, I mean, they're up to interpretation.
Indeed, indeed, they
Really.
are.
And so then we see, of course, Luke senses his friends are in danger and wants to go help them. And Yoda says, don't do it. You haven't finished your training. But real quick, do we know how long he trained on Dagobah exactly? I know that's kind of a source of contention among fans. Um, Porg, what do you know from the EU or?
I don't think they ever really say, or at least I never ran across anything that stated any kind of time frame. I mean, you'd have to imagine, maybe, a couple of days at most, 5 days if you're really lucky. Because I mean, the events are moving fairly quickly. You don't necessarily maybe get that sense of time, with the Luke and with the scenes on Dagobah, but obviously the scenes, happening on Cloud City. I mean, you would have to assume, they're moving fairly quickly. I think a lot of the source of the debate on how long it took is they obviously don't have the hyperdrive working, so it's like exactly how quick can you move, you know, from where they were to Bespin, with your sublight engines. You don't necessarily get that sense of time there. I mean, obviously, Vader's able to jump there and get there ahead of them, and make the deal with Lando. So, I mean, like I said, I think that it's 2 to 3 days, maybe a week at tops.
Okay, well, here's another question, and I know we're getting a little bit off topic, but Luke, if you say, let's just say a week absolute max training, okay? He becomes in the EU one of the most powerful Jedi of all time. So the prequels, it's the idea that you have to be, start at a very young age and you have to train all these years. So how is Luke essentially able to train himself to become so powerful?
I don't. I mean, in the Legends EU, I mean, his power grows a little more gradually. I mean, he spends a lot of time scouring, for teachings, for hologrounds, anything that can give him a better idea of what a Jedi is, how to be a Jedi, to learn those powers. So I mean, it's not like like certain other individuals that seem to have this massive mastery of the force literally overnight. I mean, it is kind of a gradual process. I mean, and I guess in some ways too, I mean, you could have an instance of a prodigy. I mean, so he, it might be that he's being, a Skywalker always seems to kind of lend you extraordinary ability to begin with. So, I mean, it could be that, he already kind of has, with the prodigal power that it's like, oh, he's able to quickly grasp these concepts, that he's shown.
Yeah, and it is canonized in Rebels that the episode Twin Sons, where Maul and Obi-Wan face off, that Obi-Wan says, "This is the chosen one." So if he's prophesied to be the chosen one, then yeah, maybe it would come more easily to him. It's just kind of odd to me that he is such an anomaly.
Well,
But
Luke was training. I guess you could say Luke's training began on Tatooine. He was bullseyeing womp rats in the old T-16, if you recall.
yeah,
And I think it was it which was the pilot that said, "Oh no, who can make that shot? Oh no, that's not much bigger than the womp rats."
That's
Wedge,
the fake wedge.
fake Wedge. Okay. So Luke
great.
seems to have. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say there's a story in a certain point of view. You remember that, Porg?
Of the
Uh,
fake wedge.
isn't that in that book?
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Go ahead, Draco.
Well, Luke seems to have picked up his father's sensitivity with the Force. That, of course, he's not out there piloting pod racers, but he is piloting his T-16 through these canyons, and shooting these the womp rats, not swamp rats. I'm thinking of ROUSs, which are very different things.
Rodents of unusual size.
They are very different. Well, of course. So I think they're a myth. They are a myth, clearly. So Luke has had a sensitivity for this. He does have the Skywalker curse of being kind of a whiny baby sometimes. But it occurs to me that even through the end of Return of the Jedi, Luke is not extraordinarily powerful. He is probably an average to below average Jedi. His magical ability, his special power, is not that he is able to overpower other people. It's not that he has special abilities. His special power, his special ability is that he believes in the redeemability of his father. That's it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that essentially is what he uses to defeat the Empire. I mean, that faith. He doesn't overpower him with the Force. He throws down his lightsaber.
Correct. And so Luke may through the EU become inordinately powerful, but as far as we see at the end of Return of the Jedi, he is not a super weapon of a Jedi. He is
No.
his only superpower is his belief in his father and that his father can come back.
Yeah, and it's all moot now because the legends are just that. They're legends, they're decanonized. And as I've stated before, Porg is the expert on the EU, and I've got another buddy who read the EU extensively. And when Disney made that announcement that they were decanonizing all of that EU, I mean, it was a devastating blow to a lot of people, Draco.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. I even though I hadn't read up much on the EU, when I saw that notice myself, I couldn't imagine what Disney was thinking trying to write all that out.
Well, my initial thought was, okay, it's just like in Star Trek where you get to Voyager and then the writer said it's too complex to write now because there's so many stories to keep everything straight within the canon. So let's go back to the beginning before Kirk's era, which really aggravates me. But we're not talking about Star Trek. I think it's kind of the same situation here in a way.
It could be. It honestly, in my perspective, it seemed more of a case of pride. They didn't want to be bound by someone else's story, someone else's plot.
No,
They
I
wanted
go ahead.
they wanted to be able to create a brand new original storyline because if they were going to go ahead and do the Thrawn stories, everyone who has access to the books knows how they're going to end. And so that's money lost on the part of Disney because they want people to go in because they have no idea what's going to happen. They want to be able to subvert people's expectations. So
Yeah, but how many people are going to buy Wins a Winner? You know what I
oh,
mean? I think the people who read the Thrawn trilogy, um, I don't know what the percentage is. I honestly don't have those numbers. It's hard to quantify. But I thought my expectation when they decanonized the EU was that they were going to at least draw elements from it, and they have. They have drawn some elements from it, but not to the extent that I thought they were going to. And I think that's disappointed a lot of fans.
See, I'm honestly surprised they've brought as much in as they have.
Really?
Yeah, being invested in the Legends books like I was when they decanonized it. I mean, that I was pretty upset. That's probably been the thing that's upset me the most about the Disney acquisition.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had a lot more invested in the EU than I actually did the movies. Um,
And
but
that you type of person that kept the franchise afloat.
right. But I mean, so I figured when they were going to get rid of it, when they said, "Well, we're going to get rid of it," I was very upset with it. I've calmed down to a degree, and after a while, I mean, I kind of understood it. It's like, once I realized too that they were going to do more than just the sequel trilogy. It's like, well, okay, no, I guess I can understand it, because you don't want to be handcuffed in that way, where it's like, well, we'd like to tell the story but we can't because it was in a book that was written 15 years ago.
Nobody puts a baby in a corner.
Right. So I mean, it's been interesting to me that they've brought so much of it back in there. That they brought somebody like Thrawn in. That they've brought some of these characters back in some of these locations and stuff. So I mean, it's been one of the few things that I've enjoyed is watching them bring all those back. So people that hadn't invested in that, now they get an opportunity to see these characters, to see this part of the Star Wars lore, and in a way too, it's it keeps it kind of interesting for myself, because it's like, oh, we're bringing Thrawn back. So what are you going to do? So I mean, it's a way to generate interest for someone like myself, because
Yeah.
like Draco was saying, well, it's not going to be the same story. I don't want to buy the book or watch a series or a movie where it's going to be the same story, because I already know it.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Would you rather have seen the Thrawn trilogy as a film, or would you rather have them brought him back into Rebels like they did? I mean, surely if you like it's like any book you read, you want to see the movie, right? Even if you know how it goes. Like I was super excited to see The Dark Tower. Of course, that was a disaster, but you want to see your stories come to life on screen, right?
Well, and Thrawn may be kind of a special circumstance, because I mean, you still could have the Thrawn trilogy, bring the books into as movies, because he's a character that in the books, it's that those books take place after Jedi. It's mentioned that he was around during the time of the rebellion and the early Empire, but he's disappeared. He kind of went off to some unknown location, and now all of a sudden he's back, and
Oh,
they're trying
so
to
so
deal with
you
him.
actually do that. So he was working for Palpatine, like he was an actual officer,
Hmm.
EU. So the way they've done the story now, it would totally be possible to tell
It,
that story.
it would totally be possible for them to still go tell that story.
Oh my. Who would you cast?
I don't know. I don't know who you would cast in that. It just given the way like his character is, and with the technology that they have, I mean, you could almost CGI um, him in. I mean, it would
Yeah.
probably be better if they did some sort of like motion capture, like they kind of what they like was I'm not gonna be able to think of his name now, that did Schmiegel.
Dewback. You're talking
Andy Circus.
and
Strickus, right?
yeah.
With some of the the roles that he's played, being able to do the motion capture, I think that would probably be better for something like that. And then in that case, I mean, I think you would need to bring someone that could bring, a presence about them with their performance, not necessarily, because that's kind of always been Thrawn's thing, is he's a very commanding presence. It's not necessarily that he has um, he's a dynamic person. It's just he's got that that presence, that people will follow his commands without without thinking, utter loyalty, and he's got that kind of super intelligence, uh, that they kind of show in Rebels, with studying the artwork, that was kind of one of the things that he was known for in the Legends, was that was supposedly his thing, is you study the art of your enemy in order to understand them and defeat them.
Let me here's a two-part question for you, Porg. What did you think about Thrawn's portrayal in Rebels?
I think, given what I've read, it was a little of a bit of a letdown. Um,
How so?
well, he became kind of a boogeyman in the Legends EU, especially after his series. He was, you know, in a lot of ways, kind of that typical Imperial commander. He's overconfident, and it basically leads to his downfall. But he's always portrayed as kind of this genius, and was always, 2 or 3 steps ahead of whoever his adversaries were. I didn't necessarily feel like that was the case in Rebels. He was definitely thinking ahead of them. He definitely, in some ways, was kind of leading them along the way he wanted. But, just a couple of other things. I mean, I guess in some of that's just, them trying to, you can't have them take out the crew, because then you don't have a series. But he kind of became a little bit of a kind of a Scooby-Doo villain, in some ways, in the way that they were kind of able to thwart him.
What did you think, Draco?
I have not seen. I did not have a chance to read much of the old EU
No,
before.
I'm talking about you. What did you think of Thrawn in Rebels?
In Rebels,
Yeah, even not reading the EU, because I didn't read the EU either. So we heard Porg's perspective from reading the EU, but what was your perspective having not read the EU of the character?
the character, from my perspective in Rebels, seemed very competent. True, he was perceived more of a Scooby Doo villain, but it was less of the fact that he himself was inept, more so than it was that his lackeys were inept, and a lot of that had to do with, I do believe, the governor of Lothal being inept. More often than not,
Governor
whenever
Price?
Governor Price, whenever one of Arinda Price's actions led to a downfall, of course, it would reflect badly on Thrawn. If reading the Thrawn book, which I listened to the audiobook, as I had mentioned to you, Taurus, a painful experience at one portion. The audio that they used for one particular form of alien was just god awful. Um, but it's made clear in that book that Arinda Price uh, is owed a favor from him. So his appearance in Rebels is tied directly into the Thrawn book. He's only there because he owes her a favor. She is being the politician who will be smoothing through his path to power and the efforts he's trying to put forward in exchange for his military assistance in getting rid of these rebels.
Yeah. Okay. So the second question I want to ask Porg, uh, Thrawn's voiced by Lars Mikkelsen. If they did do a Thrawn trilogy, what would you think about the voice actor portraying Thrawn via motion capture?
I don't think I would have a problem with that. I mean, for the most part, I think they got his look fairly well. I and I guess in a way it would make sense, because that's what we're used to now. That's what we've seen. So it would probably be less of a shock to people that have seen Rebels to see that, um, to have him do that. So I think that you could. I don't think you could have him actually, you know, portray him other than some sort of CGI motion capture. I just don't know, if they try to use makeup and prosthetics, if it would come off, quite the same.
Here's what's interesting: is the voice actor for Thrawn. Thrawn to me has always seemed like a very Hannibal Lecter type character. The voice actor for Thrawn's brother actually portrayed Hannibal in the Hannibal series and played Galen Erso in Rogue One, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of interesting. Um, but yeah, we've gotten way, way, way off topic. Where were we, Draco, on the on the Empire? discussion.
Well, we had been speaking about how much time Luke had been training on Dagobah, estimating as to how long it had taken. I would estimate that following the Battle of Hoth, you had a day in which Han Solo and crew is trying to evade the Imperial forces, and they find a safe haven, quote unquote, safe haven in the asteroid. I would probably say half a day to another day in the asteroid working on things, in which time Han has the opportunity to kind of brush up against Leia and flirt a little bit, and before they escape the giant space slug and continue on to evade the rest of the Empire. I'd say probably day 3 they are dumped with the trash, and they begin their journey to Cloud City, Vespin. Um, I don't know. I want to say that probably a week to 10 days is what Luke had to train with Yoda, and that contributed a large deal to his overall ability. Again, in Return of the Jedi, he was not the most powerful Jedi there was. He was an average or below average Jedi, in my estimation.
He was a Padawan.
I don't even know if you could really even classify him as a Padawan. Because I mean, if you think about that battle, the duel between him and Vader, like Vader's not even really trying.
No,
Like
I agree.
he's just kind of dialing it in almost. It's like they have a little bit of a tussle there, and then Vader starts throwing stuff at him, and Luke's having a hard time with all of that. I
It's like Vader's keeping count in his head. Well, I could have killed you once, that's twice, could have killed you 3 times. How many times do you think Vader could have killed Luke in that battle, but he chose not to?
Well, I think he's to a degree he's testing Luke's abilities because later on he says, let's rule the galaxy as father and son, and I think he's kind of testing him there because he really, I mean, he doesn't want to kill his son, regardless of what the emperor wants, and yeah, like you guys mentioned, he's not really trying in that battle.
And
So,
so, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, are we ready to talk about the big plot twist yet?
I think so. Of course, Luke abandons Dagobah and his training. He goes to Cloud City, falls into the trap. Of course, by this point, Han has already been frozen in carbonite and is there in the process of hauling him off to Boba Fett's ship.
Let's talk about the most famous and awesome love scene of all time. How awesome and underrated where he's getting ready to be frozen in carbonite, and Leia says, "I love you," and he says, "I know."
overrated.
Oh my God, our friendship is over.
They did a play on that. I ended up watching Ready Player One recently, and they did a play on that. At one point, the girl character says, "I love you," and he goes, "I know," and she says, "Oh no, you did not just say that." And he's like, "No, it's from a line. It was a line from a movie. I swear, I swear." And anyhow, it is a unique. It's a unique, especially amongst movies of the time, because it was a lot of people consider that was you had the golden age of movies where you had the great movie actors, and generally if someone professes their love for another person, um, it's the formula is they've got to say it back. They've got to say it back, or obviously they do not care a bit.
Well, not only that, but in films there always has to be a love story. I mean, even take Lord of the Rings. There was no love story in Lord of the Rings, and the producers chose to delve into the appendix and make the love story between Aragorn and Arwen, and because that appeals to everyone. But this love story in the OT was just tastefully done. It was very subtle, and I loved that about it.
Well, speaking of Lord of the Rings, there had been references to it in the Lord of the Rings. Uh,
Oh,
Aragorn's reluctance to take up. Go ahead.
Well, no, I agree with you. It was absolutely mentioned, but the producers um, pulled a lot more info from the appendices to draw that love story in a bigger picture.
I would agree that they did enhance that love story.
Yeah,
Um, Han and Leia, it was tastefully done. It was a slow romance that was very slow to build, and they grew together, and neither one of them had to demean themselves or embarrass themselves in front of the other in order for it to happen. Both of them had their guards up, and in true sci-fi fashion, they kept their shields up the entire time.
yeah.
And it wasn't until that one moment, she's a prisoner, he's a prisoner, he's about to be frozen in carbonite. They don't even know if he's going to survive. And she finally lets down her shield, says, I love you. But does he let down his shields? No, no, he does not let down his shields at that point because
Hell no.
he's going into this. He doesn't know if he's going to survive it. If he comes out of it eventually, who knows where he'll be, when he'll be, and who's going to be around.
Do we want to talk about the C-3PO scene on Bespin?
The build a robot.
Yeah, where he gets taken apart by the Ugnaughts, and Chewie finds him and rebuilds him. Of course, his head's on backwards, and 3PO in 3PO fashion starts nagging at him. Um, did you guys feel like that added to the overall character development of 3PO and Chewie?
Well, it certainly built upon the fact that Chewbacca is a mechanic. He's always working on the Millennium Falcon. He's always trying to tune it up, make it run better. But in this point, he shows off his skills being able to build or reassemble droids that have been torn apart. I'm not certain how exactly C-3PO had been torn apart. It looked like some pretty uh, straight cuts, almost like a laser cutter of some sort. That
Laser
had
sword.
a laser sword. Oh my gosh. Um,
Age.
hey, but Chewbacca was able to put him back together. Now, in the first in A New Hope, C-3PO had kind of been the voice of the audience in as to, what are the chances of this? This is kind of crazy. Why are you doing this? And he continued in this perspective throughout the second movie that we had seen, The Empire Strikes Back. At the point where he's finally waking up, he's of course telling everyone, "Oh my gosh, it's a trap." Well, in not quite those words. So,
No, those words were saved for another character for another time.
that's another story.
Every time I see that scene where he's on the conveyor belt, I keep hoping they're going to drop his head down into the smelter.
God.
Some hostility towards C-3PO here.
We're talking about a guy whose favorite scene is when 3PO's head is on a battle droid in Attack of the Clones.
That is probably the best scene for C-3PO in any of the movies.
See? That's what I'm telling you.
Just the smile that comes to my face when he's like, "Die, Jedi, die."
It was a good scene. I thought it was funny.
I think it was Die Jedi Dogs, wasn't it?
It just died Jedi, and by that time I'm laughing so hard. I always miss what he says after that. But
All right.
no, I mean, and as far as C-3PO goes in this, though, I mean, he does kind of continue that role. It was nice to see him shut up for a little while. And in some ways, though, I wonder, though, because, he's kind of been that outside perspective or the voice of the audience. Like, if Lucas didn't do that on purpose, then because, as we're watching this, we're like, this is a trap. This isn't going to go well. You need to figure something out. We don't need C-3PO there to tell us all of that. So in order to get around that, it's like, what do I need to do? Oh, well, he's conveniently, disassembled and removed from the equation. And until we're kind of past that, and we need to escape.
And that kind of adds to the suspicion because the audience has been able to rely on C3PO to point out things and tell us what's important, what's odd, what's impressive. And so we're here, we're not quite trusting Lando. And suddenly, our translator, the one who explains to us what is so amazing or what the chances are in this world, he suddenly is torn into pieces. What are we to think?
Yeah, and it becomes very bleak.
Plus, I mean, he also doesn't have R2 there. I mean, a lot of some of a lot of the stuff with C3PO is that him playing, like I said in the previous videos, him and R2 being able to play off of each other, kind of in that comedic routine, so if he doesn't have his sidekick there, what function does he serve then?
Right.
Curiosity. Which one is the sidekick, C3PO or R2D2?
They're both the sidekick. Plot twist.
Expectations subverted. All right, so let's get to the Vader scene. Luke shows up, and Vader is waiting for him. And they cross sabers. Like we said earlier, Vader was toying with him. How iconic is that moment when Vader reveals that he is Luke's father?
It's
Porg.
probably got to be like the iconic scene. I mean, again, it's one of those things that like, another one of those lines that you can reference and immediately anybody, whether or not they've actually seen the movie or not, knows what that's from. It's also, one of the most misquoted lines
Yeah.
in all of movie cinema too. So
Yeah, Luke, I am your father was not actually spoken. It's just like beam me up, Scotty was never actually said in the original series of Star.
So and I mean, like, and just the sheer that sheer revelation, just it just you've got to pick your jaw up from the ground. Here you this evil that you just have been taught or shown that you need to just loathe and hate with to the best of your abilities, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, our hero's father is this? It's like, whoa, wait.
Yeah, and it's not even like he's just the big bad guy that he's been told, this guy's this guy's part of the Empire and he's killing all these people. He has a personal vested interest. I mean, he killed Obi-Wan, and who had become this kind of father figure and mentor to him as well. Draco, what does that scene mean to you?
That scene it was life changing at a point because it, an individual who grows up, they look at their parents, and their parents are, in most cases, their heroes. They are the ideal of what they want to be. Now, Luke never had a father. He had this idea of what his father was, and his father, as far as he knew, was a freighter pilot. We learned this from The Force Awakens. He's like, my dad piloted freighters, and Obi-Wan says, oh, your father was the greatest pilot we had ever known. Um, so his father had been a hero in his mind, and the fact that Darth Vader, a young Sith, had killed his father was a large part of why he took the path that he took. If Obi-Wan had been honest and said, "Oh, I haven't seen, that's a name I haven't heard since I chopped your father's legs off and left him in the volcano to burn," things could have probably gone differently. It's like, you did what to my dad?
Yeah.
No. So when he says Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father, and you have Luke who is just so rent by this, and Mark Hamill did such an excellent job in putting all of that emotion and
Oh yeah.
that just utter turmoil into that shriek and howl of denial, but he searched his feelings and knew it to be true. Um, and the fact it as Porglord had said, it's this phrase has worked its way throughout popular culture.
Yeah.
I Toy Story 2, Buzz Lightyear finds out that the bad guy is really his father. You had a cartoon on Cartoon Network, Johnny Bravo, where Johnny Bravo was searching for the guy who killed his 14th cousin 2 times removed. And no, Johnny, I am your 14th cousin 7 times removed.
It's iconic. It's legendary. Let me ask you guys this question: did you believe it when you were a kid and you saw that the first time? Did you think Vader was lying?
I think you had to believe that he was lying. There was, you hadn't really ever run across any instances, where you have that kind of example where the bad guy that you've been pursuing for a movie and a half turns out to be the hero's father. So it was very disbelieving, and it was very hard to try and even fathom that. You couldn't wrap your mind around it. You had to believe that he was lying. I mean, and you have no reason to believe that he's telling the truth either. So
Yeah,
it just kind of adds to it.
I don't know, when Vader says, "Search your feelings, you know it to be true," and Luke kind of squirms away because he's had one of his arms cut off, and you're thinking, this guy's his dad, and he cut his arm off. These things aren't adding up.
that's a
So
dysfunctional family.
that family reunions are very bloody.
Yeah.
In that family, in
Well,
Skywalker family.
in this case, it was cauterized, but I know what you're saying.
Yes. Vader continues. The Emperor has foreseen that you can defeat him. Join me, and together will you rule the universe as father and son. So you really get the Vader is all in on this, and Luke wants absolutely nothing to do with it. Yet he's not denying it anymore. And at the last moment, he looks down. He sees oblivion beneath him. He sees possible death. He has no idea what's beneath him, but he knows that if he stays and if he goes into Vader's custody, he may never come out of it. And if he does come out of it, he may not be the person he is. He's got that memory of, fighting himself in the cave, and the mask pops off and it's him. So he knows that there's a chance that he could fall to the dark side. He could join his father. He could get another one of those black masks and respirators. Imagine Vader has them in bulk. So
what happens, Draco? What happens if Luke is overwhelmed by this information and says, "I love you, Dad," and runs toward him and gives him a hug? What happens then? How does the story change? Does the Empire just remain in power indefinitely?
well, it's difficult to say at that point, because if Vader does convince Luke to join him, then there's a certain period of time in which Vader's got to train up Luke to be powerful enough to join him to take down the Emperor. And the
Meanwhile, taking it from the Emperor as well.
That's right. And the Emperor is going to know real quick because the Emperor has spies everywhere. He's super sensitive with the Force, and he's going to have backup plans. The fact that he tells Vader that he's foreseen that Luke can kill him is a trap.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Vader has a contingency plan. That the Emperor has a contingency plan set up in case Vader chooses to use Luke as a weapon against him.
Right, because the Emperor is hot after Luke's trail. He wants him out. He wants him out of the picture.
Well, he either wants him out or he wants to replace
Convert it. Yeah.
his aging disciple.
Sure. Yeah, what do you think, Porg?
Yeah, I mean, I think if Luke does, if he were to have joined Vader, yeah, I mean, I think the Empire continues for a while as it is, like Draco was saying, because Vader's going to have to get him trained in the ways of the Sith. But I mean, you're going to run into that problem that even if he's going to train him in the ways of the Sith, I mean, even if they both do overthrow the Emperor, you're going to have that power struggle then between Luke and Vader. So I don't know.
Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have it's going to be conflict. I mean, it's just kind of the way of the way the Sith function at that point in time. So I mean, I don't see it ending well for anybody if he goes, goes in that direction. Because, like I said, either Vader and Luke overthrow the Emperor, and then they have their power struggle, or odds are the Emperor, somehow, will defeat Vader, and then he's got Luke as his apprentice, and maybe at that point, the Empire continues as it is, but I don't really think that it ends well for the Skywalker family if Luke does.
I've always, you guys remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I've always imagined that scene as a choose your own adventure. Like, if Luke goes and hugs Vader, turn to page 63, and then what would happen if Luke basically plays a role, kind of like a Quinlan Voss in Dark Disciple, and basically plays the game. They take down the Emperor, and then Luke takes down Vader, becomes the head of the Empire, and then tries to change it politically from the inside. Just a interesting idea. But moving on, where do we go from here? Luke falls down the shaft, obviously, and is hanging there. And is this the first time that we see Leia sense him in the Force?
This, I do believe, in the movies is the first time that we observe Leia's sensitivity to the Force.
Yeah, so they're in the Millennium Falcon, and she tells Lando to turn around, and so they go and retrieve Luke. He comes in. They take him to. He gets taken to a medical frigate, correct?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah, and so he gets the new hand, and then there's the iconic scene where they're staring out the window with their droids. What an amazing scene that is! I mean, just to put yourself back, what year did that come out? 80?
I think so, yeah.
I think, Porg, you mentioned in a previous video, so many movies that came out in that era, just you couldn't suspend your disbelief because the special effects were so bad and whatnot. And they weren't even using a lot of green screen. I don't think, were they even using green screen back in the 70s, 80s? When did that come about?
No, they weren't using green screens. They were using blue screens. Because it's been pointed out that in New Hope, they originally were going to have Red Squadron and Blue Squadron as the X-Wings, but they were having issues with the Blue Squadron because they were using the blue screens at the...
Sure.
They lost the marking, so they had to... That's why they cut out a lot of that footage that they get to use in Rogue One.
Yeah. Good point.
But no, I mean, and that's a great scene. Though watching it here recently, it seems a little off. Like, and it's like you watch it, and I'm like, is it really Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher standing there, or did they like go find some kids? Because they seem like they're a little short. I mean, granted, I don't think either one of them is very tall. It was very tall in real life, but it just seems like it was a little off.
Hold on a second. This is controversial, man. To say that Hamill and Fisher were not in that scene.
I'm sure they're in that scene, and I don't know if maybe it's just that it was blue screen, and then when they went back and did it, it just the perspective's a little off.
I think what you may be seeing, Borg, is the fact that Lucas went back and he quote unquote fixed it.
Yeah, that may be what it is.
So I think that there may have been some CGI magical whatchamacallits going on in that scene, which caused it not to line up quite the way you may have seen it when you were as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably saw the original.
Did Lucas that scene?
Yeah, he put in the whole galaxy view. It changed it completely, as I recall.
External, yeah, but I didn't know that he changed the inside of the ship. Regardless, due to recent events in the Star Wars franchise, I don't know that my heart can take any more disappointments like that, Borg.
You'll be all right. You're an adult.
But we can defend the fact that they were in that scene because Luke was awfully short to be a stormtrooper.
Yeah,
very true.
Is short.
It's
from what I
it's
understand.
just a really big window for some weird reason in a medical fragment, but
Well, it was a big window, so you could show off the scene behind it, which they remade and remastered.
yeah.
Oh God, we need to do a video outlining every single update from the original to the Blu-ray. I'm sure that's already been done though, and that would be tedious.
Um, just a comment. Harrison Ford is 6'1", Carrie Fisher is 5'1", and Mark Hamill is 5'9".
Ah,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Well, I mean, yeah, because I mean, there's been documentation too about some of the scenes with her and Harrison Ford. Like she basically kind of had to stand in a box so that the height difference wasn't quite so noticeable.
Says she was 5'1",
5'1".
so a full foot taller. That's interesting.
But
We've kind of gotten to the end of the film. So, Draco, what is your favorite scene in the film?
Favorite scene of The Empire Strikes Back has to be, oh gosh, it's got to be on Hoth. It's got to be one of the Hoth scenes during the battle where the snow speeders are harpooning the AT legs and bringing them down. That is for me. It's a hard toss up between that and No Luke, I am your father. But no, it's got to be the AT scene.
Borg?
I kind of have to go with Draco. I mean, just the you know the the just getting to see that scene with the snow speeders flying around the ATATs, and their desperate attempt to try and take those down. But at the same time, I mean, that whole scene with Luke, with the revelation from Vader, I mean, you can't not have that scene up there. I don't think.
Wow. I think we have a sweep here. So the snow speeder and the ATATs is my favorite moment from the film. My first favorite moment, and then my second is when Han is getting frozen, and Leia tells him that she loves him. That for me, that response, I'd never seen a response like that before, and of course, really never again. I mean, you can't do that without copying it. So those were my two favorite moments.
All right. Well, that has been our review of why we love Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. If you'll tune in next week, our next episode, we will be, I guess you can call it, tapping the keg on the first bit of the Disney Star Wars universe. We will begin our epic venture on why we don't love Star Wars The Last Jedi.
Just as a postscript, real fast, Draco. Let's run around and do our favorite character, real quick. Who is your favorite character in The Empire Strikes Back?
Favorite character in Empire Strikes Back? Oh gosh, you got to give me a minute to talk on that one. Porg, do you have an answer?
Porg, are you there?
Yes, I think it's the introduction of Lando. He becomes such an interesting character to kind of counteract some of uh, our hero's journey or whatever. He's kind of in a lot of ways very similar to Han, but just the way he gets portrayed. He just, to me, he becomes kind of this interesting character. He's very much like I said, like Han, and it's just different enough that he's his own entity, his own personality.
Man, I gotta stop going after everybody. Um, Mine is also Lando. Han's my favorite in the entire franchise, but in this particular film, Lando is so charismatic, and he just comes out and of course he seemingly betrays his friends, but then he immediately tries to correct his actions and help them out. I just thought he was a fascinating character, and really enjoyed his addition to the lore. Draco.
You know what? I'm gonna have to be the dissenting vote here. I have to say my favorite character from The Empire Strikes Back. It at first I wanted to just go with the outlier, the Wampa, the misunderstood Wampa,
Yeah.
but where I'm actually my answer is going to be Yoda. Yoda comes in and originally he is annoying. You want him to go away. He is getting in the way of Luke finding this wise Jedi master who is finally going to be able to give him some training beyond the, 6 or 7 hours of training he had with Obi-Wan on board the Millennium Falcon before Obi-Wan ate it. Um, so you get this foolish master who is almost a drunken master in a way, who is very silly, very the farthest thing from serious in your mind. And then he reveals himself. He is the powerful wizard. He is the one that is he's looking for. But in coming to that world, he had already interviewed Luke. He knew Luke's character based on how he treated this annoying, crazed old man. So it only added to his prestige in my mind and his wisdom and his power. And I really regretted not seeing more of Yoda training Luke because the next time we see Yoda and Luke together, Yoda's dying.
Yeah.
Spoilers. So
Spoiler alert.
so
What?
so I find that Yoda had regrettably very small time on screen, and most of that time he was on screen, he was actually Mark Hamill's backpack.
Wouldn't all,
Indeed.
wouldn't all of Yoda's screen time be small?
Oh god.
Oh man.
So,
Fortunately, we got to see more of Yoda in the prequels, but
and in the Last Jedi. Um, but we are taking a break from our Why We Love Star Wars next week and going right into the rage.
be aware next week's video may be listed as an after hours video due to the ability or inability to refrain from use of certain expletives during the discussion of The Last Jedi. Be prepared. We have made notes. Bring your notes. Let's compare notes.
Notes are good, and I've been putting off watching the last hour. I'm procrastinating, so I'm gonna try and wait until Saturday night to do that, so my rage will be fresh.
Fresh and boiling.
Indeed. Well, thank you all for listening. If you have listened, and this is Taurus Crimson. We were joined by Porglord and hosted by Draco Argentum.
Thank you all for listening in, and remember, be kind, live long, and prosper, and
And
may
may
the
the Force
force be
be
with
with
you.
you.